So welcome everyone to this week's Inside the Outhouse. I'm really excited to present Mathew Townsend, who's going to be speaking about nature freedom today. But before we get to that, I just wanted to firstly acknowledge the work of the Inside the Outhouse management team, consisting of Pete, who is currently in the field, but sends his best wishes, Dave, Cherie, and also Maddie, who is in the field as well. Before we get started, I might pass over to Cherie to do a welcome or an acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Henry. Inside the Outhouse acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise the continuing connection to lands, waters, and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to the elders, both past and present and emerging.
Thanks, Cherie. So I'd now like to introduce Mathew Townsend. Mathew is the founder of Nature Freedom, which is an organisation that aims to connect and introduce young people with disabilities and or mental health to meaningful access, participation and leadership within local bush care and environmental groups. Mathew founded the organisation in 2016 after he graduated his Masters of Environmental Management degree from UQ because of difficulties finding employers, and he found the idea to start a business for young people with similar experiences. I've heard Mathew speak before, and I think he brings a wealth of experience to the table, and I'm really keen to hear him share about nature freedom and also about his own work in the Outhouse tonight. So Mathew, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Henry. I'm able to put the slides up now. Good to see you, everyone, tonight. Let's go through that. Okay, that's good. Awesome. All right. I'm hoping I have to keep moving my body because I'm really freezing here, and it's not Queensland, you know. It's got down 7 degrees on the bay side of Brisbane this morning, so it's not even winter yet. So I'm just keeping this in my fidget spinner to keep my hand warm because it's really cold. And I'm just kind of shaking my body a little bit because I'm next to the window. So I'm just trying to keep myself warm and pre-applicate myself. So, all right, so tonight, it's really going to be a really interesting conversation. So what I'm going to do is to have a little bit of a presentation for you. It's only like 10 slides. You can go quickly as possible. Coming from the journey to what going to happen, the change, and until now. And I take you a little bit of a ride to a little bus tour, feel, and that. And then at the end, I mean, you have a bit of conversation around what you see your perspective around inclusivity and accessibility in the outdoor space. So it's a really big topic, and it's got a lot of pointers that might mean for you, or something might be helpful for the others, the people in your field or your network. So here we come. You get ready, put your seatbelt on, and then get going. All right. All right. First stop, the journey from the past. So that's the picture of me on the right. I was rock climbing. I was at age 11. So I was at the recreational camp with deaf people and people with hearing loss. It was based on the North Coast in New South Wales, where I originally come from. But I've just tried to check because I'm still a Queenslander. So because I'm born here first before I moved out and came back. So I love to be in here. I'm the person, a young person acquired disability for 18 months old. So, but my experience is really based on around communication and understanding of a social context and environment, and the people and the culture where I go to, and understanding of the context of social situation and an activity. So basically rock climbing is really pretty straightforward activity. That's why we had the recreational camp and people hoping to make friends with other people from the other part of the North Coast region. And on the activity, that's really soft touch for it and make it really fun. But the environment, it's not inclusive because it was really back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it's quite a very, very different kind of culture because I'm looking back to it now, it's not inclusive. So because of the context and understanding about when you're at that age, you want to find your passion. So that's where my passion, being outdoors in nature, came from. Because I go there every year in different locations between Byron Bay, Ballina, all the way down to Port Macquarie, and all the way down inland to Dorrigo and Coff Harbour. It's a really beautiful area, and it's lots of different activities in there. I went through integrated school. It's still a mainstream school, but I was in hearing support unit with people in the hearing loss. So that it's segregated setting, but it's because I was relying on Auslan sign language with the people with their way to communicate with the teacher. But I have an integration with the mainstream classes where I'm really good at science, maths, and English. So where I'd excelled in. So it was a really good school. It's based in Lismore. And then I went to mainstream high school in Ballina. I had a teacher sitting next to me all the way from grade 7 to 12. And that's the experience. I started to think about inclusion coming from mainstream school. Yeah, so I maintained all of my passion being out in nature because I kept playing sport, mostly athletic, swimming, cricket, soccer, and a little bit of tenpin bowling, but that's the only indoor sport I do. When it's raining, I go in there. But the passion of playing sport, it's maintained around environment. So I was really fascinated by being out there. That's where I come from. All right, so along the journey now, we see what happens with that journey from a young person to 60, and all the challenges where you face prejudice, not just discrimination, but also people not direct discrimination around who I am in terms of understanding about communication, and also what kind of barriers I face with a lot of people make pre-assumption that I might be appear differently among their peers in the group, class or sporting group, or out in actually deaf camp group as well, because people have different disability there as well. So yeah, so think about where we are now in Australia. It's really unfortunately we keep losing our ranking in disability and inclusion and accessibility compared to all other developed countries around the world. It's because we have not invested enough time around social inclusion, but that's where you get the story, the message, learning about people. And that's where you can get the understanding about who they are, and that become a place. So in urban planning context, you call placemaking. So that's similar in the social model context, where people that in communication, or that kind of approach with strategy, understanding about the person's story that can feel fit in terms of culture. Yeah, and thinking about all my earlier challenges that I overcame. So I need a girlfriend, and it's making friends, finding employment. It's all come along the way. That when I face a lot of prejudice from people who don't understand about me, why I face these challenges. So after I graduated at UQ 2016, the introduction that what Henry said, I applied over 1,000 job applications for about a year and a half, and couldn't get any interview at all. I have really good track record of academic experience, work experience, and volunteer experience in the environmental space around environmental sustainability and sustainable development space. this is where my passion I'm trying to maintain, coming from my journey started from recreational camp until where I am right now. That's because it's about my happiness, fulfilling in my life. It's my journey, my goals and ambition. So I did not try to give up on the job application because I could not change people why they want to hire me to work in this field, because I'm really good at it and I'm really passionate about it. So that's why I decided to think about what that would be another way how to maintain my happiness and maybe connect more people. Why not start your business? That helps a lot. And but looking back 4 years ago this month, and I think about all the challenges and barriers, even the new emerging one, come along, and think I become resilient about it. So because I understand where and why did this happen and where did it come from as well. So that's the very biggest goal. I thought I would be alone, feeling isolated in nature space. And then when I had my first event with inclusive paddling event, with our popular one today, with All About Paddling, back in August 2018, people came and they shared the story. And I felt they often left out. And many of the groups are trying to find and where they come from. And I know it was a light bulb moment because Nature Freedom at the time was still the sole trader. And I thought, okay, I should build a community. It's not just based on my lived experience, but also a lot of people lived experience out there. So now that's becoming a focus around making friends through social inclusion, which is the biggest barrier of Nature Freedom. And then that helps with building connection and innovative opportunity around employment, the focus, and training. We get people able to get it going and all that content. So that's why it is important to keep the journey going, so to retain the passion and make it feel happiness. So, and that's where it turned out the vision. So think about down in the future and to helping to find their niche for a safe space for that inclusion value where they can grow and learn about a passion of nature. Like that's where all the people you're watching tonight, you have gone through the similar journey. You ever have your passion in nature? You got to give the people a chance to experience the same way you have gone through why you love nature. And this is all about this. Oh, I kind of get the slide moved. Okay, there you go. All right. Okay, now this is the definition of being inclusion. So it's a lot of people ask me this question almost every day, every week. I know that the term can be broad or can be vague in some context. That's basically, it's very simple. If you think about what does inclusion mean, we just say everybody from all walks of life. It's another word of inclusion. So this is the point where people coming from that way, and that way, who I look like, what I feel like, what I have, come in the same place. So that's why this diagram illustrates you very, very clearly to see in different contexts that give you an impact, an idea, the way the culture based on it, where it grows too. So in the segregated setting, you might learn about other people, you might have another experience, and you might be causing impact of being excluded, and you probably affect your mental health, and it might be affect other people's mental health. And that's a really clear trend within the last 10 years, because I'm talking about in the coming up slides about this, of why in Australia, the mental health is the biggest trend. It's because people are feeling often left out in any context in the community. So integration, yeah, that was more like late 90s, early 2000 idea. That's why my school, the primary school, they get the idea to feel the experience what other people are like around you we haven't met before. And that's where the inclusion comes through, and that's why it's very popular terminology today in corporate, government, program, project around the community or in your business. If you got inclusion definition, strategy, business model plan, and so on. And I'd side, it means that a person who wants to join your group or something, it make it more inclusive. You could call given choice and control. That's often terminology in the NGO space about participant plan, choice and control. And that's where the power of somebody feel, oh, okay, I can come along. It doesn't mean anyone's stopping you from doing this. All right, so there's some way in making the content, how to make your community program, project, activity inclusive. There's just so many different ways you can do this. It's not always the same for one group and another. So this checklist might be helping you to give it a guide in some way. So we can start with, if it's somebody who signed up for the paddle with you or some rock climbing or camping ground for the weekend, and they start to, I have a disability, or I have a language barrier, or I'm ancient, or something like that. It's usually you can have to check in with somebody. How do you make them feel included? So that's where you start listening to that person about what their needs, what their support are. So that's to give them the confidence, the trust in you, how you can get them included into program or activity. And that's where they come to the second point, what their purpose in the way how you communicate with them. So like me, for example, literally, because it's really easy for me to say someone, the speech of a word, it's shaped by the of your lip. That can make me helpful to understand what you say. So that's my communication preference for my hearing loss. There's so many different disabilities, have different ways how do they communicate. It can be nonverbal, could be verbal, or sign language, or and gestures in some form. So you can always check in with that as well. And another check-in, after a while, it might come like, let's say you do the camping for a night, Saturday, and you got 2 full days, Saturday and Sunday. So if you go, let's say, dinner time at Saturday at the campsite, you can check in the person. How did you go today? How do you feel? Have you been making friends? Have you been comfortable getting along with the activity during the day? How you feel about going to the bed with shared with other people before you haven't met before? Something like that. That's when you get really comfortable in that context. So that person might start to build more trust with you, more likely to might enjoy it for the next day. So another one, it's quite interesting here, obtaining and maintaining physical infrastructure. So if you think about where you go, you always prioritize where accessibility is available, or some place that might need work on it. You can maintain that or support that. So it's not just about somebody in wheelchair or somebody who is, let's say, vision impaired. It's always keep it that place more open and available for these people. So it's like when you're planning for that program for like month before, you can always check that accessibility is available for them as well. So that inclusion comes from the value of accessibility, because accessibility, you build something or maintain something, they come. Because they can say, oh, what's your friendly? That will come. If you don't have it, that won't come, not inclusive. And the last one, control and monitor the social environment. So this is very tricky, because I know some group, it's a mental health trigger to psychosocial disability and behavioral problem. But in general, it's about like, okay, for example, for me, if we have lots of social activity after dinner on a Saturday night before we go to bed at the campsite, making sure people communicate a little bit more clearly, not get too far, because I miss a lot of words. When that's something to get a little bit out of control in that environment, I will probably start to feel left down because I miss a lot of words. I couldn't keep up with that. So that's imagine you have to keep checking that situation. because when you keep checking in with every whole group to remind, they will start to understand and learn why they're doing that. So they build experience of having a person with disability or mental health background come along in the future program. That's where the inclusion value comes from. So, you know, you have to be really careful in some context. You know, like people feel like tokenish to be labeled or something, but also the way how they feel is like, okay, you are a transgender person. They don't really think they are a transgender person themselves. The same with the people who are living disability. We don't, even I myself, I don't call I have a disability. I just, a fact, I do have a disability, but I don't think about it. So that's what a lot of people feel in this space. So it's more about how you get that environment, like in the last point of a check in the previous slide, about maintaining an environment to make sure safe and inclusive there and comfortable. So mentally, emotionally, and physically, that's where people start to focus more about an individual. It could be a story, where that comes from, talk about their passion. If it's a 10-year-old kid, then probably more like talk about stars, something really interesting, beautiful night, you know. These people who never put this person's disability might forget about a disability and focus on a topic that might become common, you know. So that's the inclusion base. That's how get the story coming in. It make it really powerful. So that's what happens when you get later on, is start forget about it. So that's all the language and everything, it changed forever. So there's a good example in the federal parliament in New Zealand. There is an MP. He got elected, I think in 2012 or 2011. She's totally deaf. She's deaf. She doesn't wear hearing aids. It's really deaf. Quite interesting that people becoming the first time having in the parliament, you know, how parliament had bad communication and it's not inclusive for her because she's trying to do her job, you know. It's the same as someone at your campsite or your activity. They were there, want to make friends, want to be involved with something. So the environment of the parliament totally changed after so many times this person under the MP and we need to change the way to communicate because I couldn't have any conversation involved. And then that I have accessibility improved. And then after a couple of months in all the, you know, all the meetings in the parliament's quiet. Everybody is just talking one at a time. No overlapping argument. Everything is really professional. You know, how amazing an impact story come from one person. So that's why that led the community led that to happen. That's why they voted her. So that's the same when you have a camp with the different various disability in your group. It got to change too. It got to create the impact. So that's why they start to forget about the past and then move it forward too. All right, so the last point here, that what I mentioned earlier, slides about challenges and barriers. So you think about system barriers and understanding inclusion. It's very tricky to demonstrate if you don't have that information, how to show them what you can do about it. But that's a really unfortunate position where we are in Australia. It's mostly average under 50% of the community, workplace, health, education spaces are inclusive. I mean, that's why we rank last in disability inclusion and employment labour workforce in the developed country. So it's because a lot of people talk about inclusion, but there's no action. That action, so because it's not inviting. So you have to let people to have more contact with same. So that's why there's a lot of barriers around financial, social, economical, maybe social and environmental in some contexts. Infrastructure that's really poor. There's a cultural attitude around maybe some beliefs don't agree with why this person should be there, but that can't change them. And in employment, education, there's a lot of barriers internally, like, oh, there's no accessibility in that fertility. That's the biggest problem. So you think about in the outdoors and nature space, we always talk about environmental problems, climate change. It's a wicked problem. One thing impacts another, and that impacts another. It's also a disaster. That's why it turned out to be. That's the same in the social space. The attitude of that person might feel the change with the attitude in the rest of the group, and they might change the way how they think about accessibility in their community, and then so on. It's a wicked problem. So that's why at school it's really low in this country. But it's the best performance at ACCT, Canberra. You know what they're like. So the last point here, it's another interesting thing I learned since the pandemic started last year. People got busier. And I started to feel like, okay, well, I might be stressed. A lot of people will be stressed. Workforces have changed, priorities have changed, all that. Well, people with disability often left out of a lot of support around the recovery from the COVID impact. It's because they're too busy worrying about what their priorities are, not just politically, but also in your community. They're often left out in the making decisions, or including that, let's say, some sort of program, fitness support, vaccination is one big thing that's happening now. It's because CEOs to director or minister or whatever leader too busy on their own job and not prioritizing the people with disability and involved in that context for the recovery of anything. And that's become a problem right now. So you're looking at the social progress index. The light blue color is actually 2019, just a year before COVID coming in. And I'm not going to be surprised the score will going to be a lot lower as a result from last year. So this has come from the Social Impact Centre. It's based in University in Melbourne. That's the result published. I can send you a link later on with that. So that's the common say. Society and now has set one priority. That's why they're not changing. So how are we going to make it better than 50%? That's up to us, how we make it change. So it's very stressful. All right, I'm just checking. Yeah, 2 more slides. Now, I know David and Henry have asked me this question about finding a right partner, finding the value around inclusion. Yeah, again, it's very tricky, and that's our challenge with National Freedom, finding the right people. And the same when you're making friends for yourself, finding the right people to be with too. It's because, like I said in the previous slide, they're too busy. That's make it very, very challenging. So if you think about how to overcome this challenge, it could be a really good trick to get around that. What I have learned, I'm focusing on who spent the most time communicating. So people really responsive, really love your idea, really love your vision and values, really love where the people were, and also the people in that corporate might be looking after this employee very well, and because maybe they're responsive. So that will come a lot more aligned around the values and inclusion. So if you look at something like, unfortunately, I've experienced this the last couple of years with National Freedom, finding a partner with your disability community organization in that. And I started to realize that, oh, great idea, but let's start a chat. And then drop. What happened there? Because we learned about the value. What is your organization values compared to our value to organization? They're not inclusive. And they're probably worried about making a big change in the business model because they're segregated. So That's what happening in the context, and that's why it is way under 50%. So that's why we will need to focus on who spend most energy and effort around supporting the employee and showing the heart around the community involvement. Because you mostly come across with youth group to multicultural group who are always out and about. They value inclusion more. That's it, showing the action, which speak louder than words, you know. So the solution, coming to the conclusion. So like again, they talk about their value line. Spend the time when they are very active around inclusion and related stuff in the community where they're active about. In the business model, so like for example, with Ashford, we always work on the social side of this. So we got language, communication, how that work integrated into our business model, like how we do accessibility guideline, PowerPoint slide, PDF to be screen readable if someone is vision impaired, video with subtitle, all that. We set up that foundation. That's our guideline to develop. But again, don't focus too much on about accessibility, because if you focus too much on that, you probably have no idea. You might not get it right in the first time. And if someone come over, oh, the ramp too steep. But if the person told you before you get there, they tell you what is the right angle, no pun intended, to get that right slope. So that's why co-design is very important. You have to get more people in that space, have a conversation when you're making a decision. So it can be inclusive board team to inclusive operational team or inclusive support workers team, and that you have lots of different lived experiences and background coming in and support somebody or your client or participant or student, and that will make the big impact. So you've got to start from them. Bottom up, and then you get up to there. Okay, it's a really important point here. I learned this quote by a youth into ATC group for Brisbane South last week. It's really got me thinking about, because I'm not saying I'm really youth anymore, but I just turned 30 this year. But I'm looking back, winding back 10 years or so. When I was a young person asks you what you should do, you should probably be supporting them. It's because they look up to us, mentor or role model, and saying we have a problem-solving ability. We're actually creating opportunity for them that can learn out of it. You have to let them lead their own direction. So that's what this quote means. Because without this direction, they will be lost and out of control. That's why mental health is a bit consequences at the moment. So I'm feeling really empathetic about it, because I'll deal with it every week in my job and in my other job. It's very, very hard to break that cycle. So you have to try to show a little bit of compassion about what they can go goals, ambition. So you have to get them an opportunity experience. Thank you, everyone. And hopefully that's really insightful for you guys. I know it started probably warm now. My hands are warm. Unfortunately, I forgot to put the socks on. My feet is cold. So I'm hopefully having a meaningful conversation to keep ourselves warm. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Matthew. That was excellent. I think I definitely picked up a lot from that presentation, and I'm sure the rest of the room did. I think what we might do is just throw it open to the room if anyone has any questions to start off with, and then we can direct the conversation from there. So was there anyone who wanted to ask Matthew a question to start off with?
Someone asked me to go back to slideshow because I got a detail. Actually, I'll just copy and paste in the slide because I can't see you.
That's okay. I was just asking if we could get it later.
Yeah.
Well, I had a question. Maybe for people who are looking at ways to be more inclusive in their programming, do you know a good place for resources that they can find more information if they want to, if they want to find out more about it because they don't know.
Yeah, sure. It's a really good point is to look at People with Disability Australia. It's an organisation. They have lots of guidelines, templates, and pointers around. It's like, for example, inclusive language. So I have some resources that come from there. It tells you how you communicate with somebody there. And they have lots of different references around legalization to policy, not like discrimination. It's all about standards in space, like universal guideline, housing design, all that. They have, like, let's say, a library of useful information. It's really, really helpful. And then another thing is, when I met Peter last week, he's got really good assessment, self-assessment guideline about how to make your camp group or related inclusive as well. And there's a lot of references on there actually linked to the People with Disability Australia. So it is very useful. There's lots of different activity. You mentioned bushwalking, archery, camping, and swimming, and so on. So this is where you get the idea to see what does this really look like. If you're going to start a part of a co-design process and you have somebody in your email or phone call, would you accept someone with Down syndrome come to your camp for this weekend when the one you organise? You have a start of that process and conversation with that person. So training and resources is going to be the biggest part of your employees with the camp. Anywhere you go, that way you help them to how to accommodate them. So that's the biggest part, and that's the part of that guideline as well. Yeah. Yeah, I saw that the comment from Dom. Yeah, there you go. It's pretty funny. I met Dom quite a year ago when I searched Google outdoor Queensland inclusion stuff, and it just popped up from them because they had references to towards Audibility Queensland. It's a state plan or from Department of Community Disability Services to encourage around inclusion, accessibility in your community. So yeah, it definitely probably need to be updated because it's 2017 or something like that, or 2027. Yeah, 2017. So yeah, it's really, really good to connect. That helps a lot. Yeah.
Matthew, did you want to, like, I think one of the great things, and I've obviously had a bit of involvement with you over the last couple of years, but I think it'd be worth telling everyone about some of the All Abilities paddling sessions that you've run, because the key thing for them that I've found is they're about anyone can turn up to those. They're not actually paddling sessions for people with disability. They are an all abilities. If you want to go for a paddle on the bay or wherever they happen to be, okay, where you move their locations around a bit, I think that's a really wonderful thing. And you just see a group of people paddling along. You know, it's a really valuable experience. And we actually managed to drag the Minister for Sport and Recreation in Queensland along to one of them as well, which is pretty cool. But I don't know, do you want to speak about that one, mate?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I remember you were there, and yeah, it's a very good example of what inclusion look like. It's, remember back in a slide, a circle with the multicolours in a circle. That's what it's look like. We have people like, well, without a disability that come from the mainstream side, and then you got a few people with disability, and someone brought their own support person, or mum and dad, or even the little brother, the sister. And somebody who's a young person or colour or something like that. That's inclusion. That's just to feel the space. So that way people feel safe and that mixing it all up. So yeah, it's really good experience. That's why it's popular now for years.
I was looking at some of the issues that you were as you were going through your slides, and I was thinking that a growing group of people that are probably facing exactly the same problems are actually our elderly, and quite often women in their 60s, or single men who might not have a recognised disability per se, but are facing many of the same problems as they get older, are getting left behind by society.
Yeah. So where you based in again?
I'm down in Victoria, but I work a lot with Outdoors New South Wales and hang around with Dom occasionally and all the others. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure you heard that Peter, who runs the People Sub-Banding Group again. He's based in Victoria. So they've been running the camps for a while. That's where I got that guideline from. Yeah, it's a good question and a good point. It's very, very hard, like I said, about getting people to understand what inclusion means. That's why they're not around and talk about it and do something about it. So it can be political, it can be belief-based, or scientific point of view. How did it destroy and change somebody else's life, or how did it help somebody find their passion or something? So the starting point is to try to be open door. When you have a website, it's like not tokenish way, more like people from all ability or from all walk of life are welcome. Because you're using that inclusive language integrated, and then people like using their pronouns very commonly in their own community. And then just looking at some of the websites that might appear as mainstream, but they're using pronouns at their choice. It make it feel, ooh, okay, this might be really interesting, might get comfortable to talk to these people. I love this activity and nobody do it with me. And then that's how you get it started. So they have to talk in their language and context. That's how you invite people.
Matthew, there was an industry meeting under the Outdoor Education Association of Queensland on the weekend on Saturday at Brisbane Grammar School, and one of the participants there mentioned the challenges they're finding currently with more students with a disability or a perceived disability, whatever it was, them being on the spectrum or actually a physical disability of some variety, may not be using the right words there, and how do they run a program that is inclusive for these particular students. And the debate was shared in a pretty honest way about first thing in the morning about how do we put these boys into a group with, quote unquote, regularly able young men, or do we make a separate or modified program for them where we put them together and modify the program so they're still continuing? And it was a very serious question in terms of how, and this is in a long-term existing program with a really significant background and history and lots of support. What would be your impression of which way they should look at that program? I know I've only given you a little bit of detail there. I don't want to mention the school, but have you heard about that sort of thing happening within the outdoor education sector?
I'm not really sure, but I would be really interested in that, because that's what we're doing actually for it. It's about outdoor education as well. Basically on like where we run activity that get our hands dirty, that make it feel like part of a team, getting along with other people, coming in one place, work on a project together. That's the idea, the content. So that's like inclusion in practice. So that's in that space. Yeah, it's quite tricky about, like I said earlier, about a partnership. It's really, really hard, but it will get there. It's about finding the right people. So if you think about like individual, you got really rare interests or something like that. And it's not very common you find someone having interest in when you're going to school or uni. It's about that developing that relationships, So I think it's just important about collaboration in the idea about who can take that kind of leadership level. Because look, I mean, back in 2014, I started speaking up about my own rights because I'm living on the spectrum as well. I'm very often included on everything. And that's where I've become a public speaker for a long time now. And that's where you have to get somebody find that confidence in that context. So it will be all of us and up to us as well to speak to all of these people who not just struggled about partnership, but also you can change people in that kind of way by demonstrating what we do. I'm pitching you guys now what we do, how we do this, why we do this, and what is the best way in the long term. Is you're going to capture them. You might get them interested and might try to get that conversation together. So it's going to take time, but I know we almost halfway to the middle of the 21st century. It's ridiculous. I know it feels sometimes we're going backwards. But you have to try to get that right language as you get that people had invited, because there's a lot of young people out there in the community that are probably not engaged in anything. They can't find anything to do because they won't see us really do. So yeah, it's really hard. Sometimes I feel sad about it because that's just what I'm trying to push it in. And I think if maybe all of us together should work together to make it that possible. So let's try to get them to see us in that context.
I wouldn't mind speaking on that different program concept, because I was running a thing called Autism Outdoors in the ACT for a number of years, and we run programs for schools and groups down here in Victoria. But our policy is that we never assume that someone can't do something.
Oh, okay.
A carer or the parent or the school might say, little Johnny or little Jilly can't do something, where we find if we have good leaders, we run our programs, work around a team thing, you quite often find that the person with the supposed disability is actually the best at something. Whereas if you'd have listened to the can't do, you wouldn't have even let them attempt in the first place. So I'd rather adjust the program to how people are participating rather than reorganise the program assuming something that is not necessarily true.
Yeah, definitely. You are very spot on, David. Yeah. That's what if you come across to, let's say, a specific group of people on the autism and have a support group, if you listen to their story, how they view something, what they know in the community, you see, are they inclusive or not, or they're questioning how they serve a delivery or product or something. So if you look at that from that context, you develop a program and you're selling your program. We're looking for people to join this because of this program. So this is 2 2-day retreat on the weekend. This is camping. This is bang, 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 bang. That's what we're doing. That often miss a lot of piece of information. Everybody know what to got to be expect, what we're going to do. Yeah, kayaking, bushwalking, camping, go to bonfire, sing along. Okay, we all know that. We all do. But it's about the language and how we get that people feeling more inviting and feel more like exciting. You want to get them. It's all about the language. You can need marketing material to. I'm still learning from Mathew Townsend as well, but I need to know my community more so they can understand what they like, what they can feel better about it. So they have to keep pushing there, get the idea where they can see a little bit more about it. So otherwise, people who work have no idea what they're doing, and that's become a problem too, because some support workers sign up, become a support worker, and they don't do it in the job. That can be not good. That's very tricky, and so we need some more like a material, like how this Peter designed all of this. This is a starting point. Let's go to induction training, cultural awareness to language and communication guide. It's all in here, and that's where you get that experience coming in, and it will help marketing better. And you got testimonial, story, the video, picture. It tells a lot of words, and that weird thing will change.
Alan, I might just throw you in the deep end here. How does this resonate with what goes on in South Africa, given you were our guest speaker last week? We're running out of time shortly, but I just wanted to throw it out to you and maybe Jamie or anyone else who has different perspectives in other states, how inclusion seems to be happening nationally or globally.
Okay, I'm swimming.
Who's still on the bus? We're on the bus, remember?
Yeah, I'm under the bus now. Yeah, even worse. Yeah, Dave, firstly, Matthew, thank you so much. It's been good to hear from you. I think there's a lot of progression here in South Africa. There's a need for it, and it's been recognized, much like all over the world. It's still very much a how-to. So I've got a friend of mine who works with deaf people on a professional basis, and she's helped me a lot to understand how to communicate, how to actually, how to connect with people, how to talk properly so that people can understand what you're saying. But we're looking here as an example at finding funding for a new development, and part of the criteria for that development is to make sure that it's all abilities capable. That because our venue at the moment isn't suitable for people with disabilities. So, and even our activities, we've tried to adapt, but it's not our core focus. And there's definitely a need to be able to say to people when they come, they're not feeling left out. And I loved what David said about, never assume someone can't do anything. We've had activities where the capable people have carried someone in a wheelchair, and it's just been part of the. We've made them change the activity to say, okay, this person has to be included. They can't just be set out or left out, and often brought it back to the group and said, how can you include them, and how can you make sure that they are part of the group rather than just saying it's a facilitator's idea. And it becomes a whole new level of an activity, or a whole new problem-solving activity, should we say. But there's lots more work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very true. And that's where the content, where they're coming from, and you have no idea if they don't come from, because you're not open enough for it. So, yeah, it's really interesting. It got me rethinking what you're saying about schools. Like how well they do it in education around, well, depending on whether they're inclusive or not too, if it happens to be an understanding. So I think it's really important, maybe look for all of ourselves, it's about up to the peak body. The peak body, leadership, about making our outdoor space inclusive. So I think that will demonstrate a very strong message to stakeholders about how you design or co-design the program to include anyone. So I think it's a bigger issue around what we're expecting in Nature Freedom. We have a lot of disability providers want to do group booking, inclusive paddling, for example. We kind of say no, but it would be nice to include them to experience the activity, but that's not the definition of the inclusive paddling. It's just themselves. That's segregation. So that's what I try not to confuse people by our standard. So that's why we're trying to demonstrate as a role model what the inclusion look like in that context. So when you're thinking about when you have school groups or something like that, maybe if you organize a let's say a very special spring camp coming up, and you got like your regular group involved, and maybe you could try to get disability unit of their school or whatever, they really come at the same time. That includes it, and because the student will learn about others more rather than just themselves. Don't worry about any of their change, they're responsible of it, but also don't worry about if they're turned down, not just the disability one, but also because often people, oh, I don't want to include them. That's not what we're trying to design for. Oh, what happened to change in it? People are scared, you know, people are scared of change because they're afraid of people from where they're coming from. It's like, let's say a few years ago, like people all thought all Muslims are terrorists, but they're not. That's not what they think about where they're coming from. That's really hurtful, you know. So that's why it's up to the pig body, because like we are working with Dom around that in space here in Queensland. You think about like our leadership. The leadership talks to the government, all these people in the stakeholder area, what this look like, how we doing it, how we can help them to make it possible. So that's the commitment you're going to make. It is to make a big impact if you come down the track. It's very tricky. Yeah.
It's tricky from a peak body point of view too, but it's interesting because I think that in the context of outdoor education, it comes back to that the whole idea of the program that the entire group of kids are going on is for them to learn while they're in the outdoors. And there's a really good learning opportunity by having an inclusive program about the various abilities of different people. And I think it's just a different way of looking at what the program's all about. It's not necessarily just about learning about the place you're going to, it's also learning about the people who are being who are in that program together. So I think it's just a different way of, you got to change a bit of thinking there to try to encourage that inclusivity, I think.
It's a bit of journey with that space. I know it's a lot about message in the story, and people from your community have a say on that. It takes time. You will find the right people down the track. It gets more powerful from there. So that's where to get the conversation going and get the actions out of that.
Yeah, I'll just add in 2 cents, kind of tying in what I've kind of gathered from this, and kind of what David was asking about that school that was looking at different ways to include people. Should they create a separate group, or should they have them integrated? And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, is that the people should decide. You know, it's not just about inclusivity, it's what the people actually want to do. So, and I think the important part of that, and like you've said over and over again, it's about communication. It's about starting that conversation. And I think that's such a big aspect of it. Even if you can't make those changes right away to include that person in that program, by starting the conversation, you're starting to think about it and think about ways to be inclusive. And I think that's the thing that's going to propel us forward and going to make all of our programs more inclusive and bring people together, is just by having the conversation. So that's kind of what I've gathered from what you said. And I think it's a really great message from what I've gathered.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, because I know, going back to that picture about inclusion in the yoga side, I think it's really depends on the business model, how you work at a cost structure, your audience, what's your purpose, and what's your stakeholder. So inclusion is fine when you use side, because use side is also involving inclusion anyway. It still might not make a difference, but I think the difference is about people's choice and understanding your values, mission, and purpose. That as part of your business model. So I think that's where we are at the moment. National Freedom is in the middle of trying to make inclusion, to make you decide. But the challenge is here, it's about how do we, all of our message, what we're trying from the business perspective, get heard and understood in the other community. Because you've got, like, let's say, in Spain for a long time, I realized this, it's like a booking page, camps, scouts, and guides, for example. And you're looking down 6 to 14-year-old, and all these different week bookings and stuff like that, activity. On this website, doesn't say who is between 6 and 14 years old. Who? It doesn't say anyone specifically, just the age group. That's where a lot of people think, right, able-bodied, that's what happening from disability perspective, because it's the way how the language message on that website or the business strategy or something like that. And that's where it just gets really tricky if you're trying to make it user side, because it's always been user side for a long time, but it's not encouraging to someone with the identity background to think of it, that might be comfortable to get involved. So that's why we're trying to get that co-design with that inclusion and the user side to get to the other side to make sure in the same space, because it can be segregated or in one's camp or integrated to the other activity, and it's just a mix. That's powerful. Because it's about the message you're trying to give to people to know how we design this program. How would that make it happen? How do you really encourage people? So I think it's a lot of work in this space, because we don't know what it's going to look like yet, because we need community perspective to explain all that, so we can make it clear for them and get them understand and trust. So that come all together. So that's why the inclusion is the starting point to get inclusion. I mean, I have regular participants come and join our event, because all our users I didn't make them to design, they did it themselves now. So that's why they started to feel comfortable about it.
May I ask
Thank you.
a question
So-
if there's still time?
I might just wrap up the formal proceedings elements first, and then more than welcome to stay on the line. So we have come to the end of our recorded session. I think tonight's been an excellent session. So Mathew, thank you so much for coming inside the Outhaus and sharing your perspectives and nature freedom with us all. I know it's been really informative, and I'll definitely be taking a lot away from it. And just before we go, I'd like to pass over to, I think, Cherie or Dave, who's going to give us a bit of a taster for next time in the Outhaus.
I was just gonna mention that next week we're gonna have Becky Harth from ABAT, who's gonna come in and just tell us a little bit about the National Forum for ABAT, the Australian Association for Bush Adventure Therapy. So she's just gonna come mention it. It's not what our session's about, but she's just going to come in. So if you guys want to hear more about that, and then I'll post the link in the thing in case anybody's interested in checking that out.
And that's on the 7th of June. Can you believe that? So it's actually 3 weeks, given we're still on our first and third Monday of the month. We'll stop the recordings now. Thanks very much, everybody. It's been amazing.